Hello and welcome to today's RIMS webinar sponsored by Tuvsud GRC, Inflation and Property Valuations, Aligning Your Assets with Reality. I am Justin Smollison, Business Content Manager here at RIMS, the Risk and Insurance Management Society. A few notes before we begin. If you have a question for the presenters during today's session, please submit them by writing in the question box. Feel free to ask at any point during the presentation. We will answer as many as we can during the Q&A portion at the end. And for those we cannot address today, the Tuvsud GRC team will reply to you directly. Following this session, the recording will be available through the on-demand events page of rims.org. All downloads and contact information will be accessible to the sponsor. And folks, before we begin, did you know that Risk World 2024 is coming up? It will be held in sunny San Diego, California, May 5th through May 8th. Register at rims.org/riskworld. We are always delighted to see global risk consultants there. They will be at booth 1927. They often have candy. So visit them and tell them that you saw this webinar. And on with today's presentation. In the wake of record inflation, property valuations often do not reflect reality. Inaccurate valuations are a big problem and quite widespread. The issue is this: claims may not pay for rebuilding or replacement costs. But experts from GRC and Brookfield Properties are here to delve into this topic and offer steps to properly reanalyze your portfolio. RIMS is thrilled to welcome a wonderful global audience. And now I will hand it off to my friend, Tuvsud GRC's marketing manager, Jared Shelley.
Hey, thank you, Justin, and welcome everybody to our webinar. As you heard in the intro, property valuations often don't reflect reality, especially after the recent inflationary period. Inaccurate valuations mean loss expectancies are wrong and claims may not cover replacement or rebuilding costs. Meanwhile, recent inflation and a challenging property insurance market has led carriers to become more meticulous on valuations. Yet it's an open secret that many companies have inaccurate valuations. And judging by the large group of attendees with us today, you'd like some solutions to get valuations in line with reality. How can you gain accurate valuations without breaking the bank? We're here to help you answer that very question. In today's webinar, we will discuss effects of recent inflation and supply chain issues, consequences of allowing a portfolio to be underinsured, why accurate valuations are critical even as the market begins to soften slightly, and steps to analyze a portfolio and ensure accurate valuations. I'm joined today by an esteemed group of experts with incredible knowledge of recent trends and valuations. Justin Chen is Global Manager of Property Valuation Services at Global Risk Consultants and works with some of the world's most well-known companies on their valuations. Frank Francone is Senior Director of Risk Management at Brookfield Properties and has worked for the company more than 16 years. He's an expert in insurable values portfolio calculations and loss control programs. He's also one of GRC's favorite property valuation clients. Charlie Carricker is Strategic Sales Manager for Project Services at GRC. He's an expert in risk engineering and loss control with more than 20 years of experience in the field. And I'm Jared Shelley, Head of Marketing at GRC, and I'll be our moderator. We'll conduct today's webinar interview style. I'll ask questions of our panelists throughout the presentation. If you have a question, put it into the question box on your screen anytime, and we'll answer the questions at the end of our discussion. We really want this to be interactive, so get those questions in. And now for my first question, we'll go to Justin. Why are valuations for property and equipment important in the first place?
Thanks, Jared. So basically, when you're reporting your values, you're first representing your business and your risk through your values. So it's one of the first pieces of information you're giving to an insured, and it's starting to create this trusting relationship between yourself and an insurer. One of the big things about if you're underinsured, it can leave the policyholder unprotected. And in case of a claim, the policyholder may only receive a fraction of the actual cost to repair or replace their damaged property, and could be financially detrimental to their business. So, you have to have that capital to be able to bring your business back to where it was and whole. And are you able to do that? Valuation is the foundation of a well-structured property program. It's important to get values right because, one, it assures proper risk transfer terms and cost for exposures. It's a big foundational number for accurate loss estimates and risk modeling. It includes up-to-date Nat Cat accumulation. It's good for the informed analysis for retention and reinsurance analysis. And again, back to risk engineering, it provides better estimates and risk improvement recommendations and more accurate risk improvement recommendations. So setting up a process or methodology for developing replacement cost values every year is important. And there's no one in a company that is responsible for developing replacement cost values. You have your finance department, you might have a construction department, but there's no one really their primary job to develop replacement cost values, and it's important to partner up with someone or have a methodology to come up with replacement cost values every year.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. And Frank, what are your thoughts on why property valuations and equipment valuations are so important in the first place, just to help us level set?
Of course, yeah, as Justin was mentioning, but let's understand that it is important for us to acknowledge that the building replacement cost valuation needs its own process, but the building replacement cost methodology process that applies current construction costs to its own valuation calculation, we will have created a statement of values that is both accurate and reliable year over year. Secondly, we want an accurate account of our loss exposures, what assets and in what locations hold the greatest loss exposures to our business. Having confidence in the loss exposure analysis gives the risk manager proper guidance in their decision-making process when considering investing limited capital dollars, human resources towards assets with the greatest loss exposures in order to help mitigate some or much of the risk that may exist. Lastly, procuring property insurance requires a submittal of a complete statement of values with accurate and reliable building replacement costs. We want to be confident that we have insured our asset evaluations that are reasonable, accurate, so that in the event of a significant loss, we can recover much of our losses and have that asset back up and working for us as quickly as possible.
Great, thank you, Frank. And Frank, we're going to stay with you for the next question. Inflation may be subsiding, but its effects remain after a difficult few years. What are some lessons learned from the recent inflationary period from your end?
Well, simply for me, it reinforces the need for and importance of maintaining a valuation process that is specifically designed for building replacement costs. It is critical to account for construction cost changes year over year. This approach allows a risk manager to better deal with unexpected and challenging economic factors like the most recent inflationary period, so that a risk manager is not caught off guard to recent changes in construction costs. In addition, having to play catch up to past statement of values creates a level of uncertainty that may lead to a strategy or decision not consistent with your stated risk management goals.
And Justin, what do you think about some lessons learned from inflation?
Yeah, it's exactly as Frank said. You don't want to be relying on outdated valuation data. It puts your company at risk. You want to put a high importance valuation process in place. You have that methodology every year to say, okay, we're going to either do a on-site valuation, desktop valuation, or use indices to keep our values up to date. During this past inflationary period, we saw construction costs go through the roof. 2021, we saw 8 to 10% increase. 2022, 12 to 16% increase. And now this past year, 2023, things are starting to stabilize and go back down to where we're used to, that 2 to 4%, 1 to 4% inflationary increases in construction costs. So if you haven't been updating your numbers properly, you could see that gap of 30, 40% in the past 3 years, which puts your company at risk. So you just want to make sure you're correct and you have a methodology for that. The high inflation, historic supply chain crisis, and labor issues have been major categories and why construction costs have been increasing.
Great, thank you, Justin. And Frank, let's go to you for question 3 here. What are some lessons learned from the hard property insurance market we've seen over the past few years?
Yes, of course. Well, we have spent much of our conversation on valuations, and rightly so. Here, I want to take the opportunity to touch on how a hard market reinforces the importance of having a strong overall risk management program It includes a well-developed risk engineering loss control program, as well as an accurate and strategically reliable statement of values. In a hard market, carriers may look to other factors within a risk management program a bit more closely. The factor most reviewed is the loss prevention process history of the overall program. Being able to provide historical data on efforts made by an organization to actively mitigate risk should deliver positive results to your organization. Much of the risk management activities, mitigation activities that are key to loss prevention are simply routine inspections, equipment maintenance, repair schedules, and routine fire equipment testing, among others. Making sure that all systems are ready to operate should they be called upon to do so in an emergency is a key factor to carriers when reviewing your loss prevention program. Finally, by establishing and maintaining a strong loss prevention program over time may be your key to better navigating a hard market environment.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. And Justin, what are your thoughts on how the hard market has played into all this?
Yeah, so what we've seen on the insurer side of things is that they're a little bit more stringent on their underwriting policies. They're offering maybe some less favorable terms for coverage. They're increasing their premiums. They're really analyzing valuations as part of this because of the inflation. They're seeing their losses. They're seeing, a lot of the properties are being underinsured. So some requirements might be, well, how are you coming up with your values? Can you prove your accuracy? Should we do appraisals? Should we just looking at the values and going back to that foundation of their property program? Some other things that we've seen insurers do, they're looking more at limits of liability endorsements, margin clauses, and co-insurance clauses to help mitigate some of these risks that they're taking on because of the hard market, their losses, and they know that there's some valuation issues going on with accounts.
Absolutely. Justin, what are the consequences of allowing your portfolio to become underinsured?
Yeah, depending on how big your book of business is, how many locations, things like that, you're aggregating your risk, right? So if one location's low, many of your locations might be low if you don't have that methodology of coming up with property values and the accuracy of that. Again, we talked about it in the last question. Insurers are coming up with more margin clauses, co-insurance clauses. So if there is that loss, you might not get the money to be able to get back into business. And do you have the capital to be able to take on that risk and get back onto business? You're creating a financial risk and business risk if you have a loss and you can't get back up to business.
And Justin, how often should companies conduct valuations?
So typically we say to create that baseline, we want to do an on-site appraisal every 5 to 7 years. And then you can kind of maintain those values using industry-specific indices every year. So one, you want to look at every year, look at your values, see if they seem in line, use indices, and then also take into account, we have some additions, we might have some deletions to a location. Can we capture that and adjust our values appropriately?
And then, Justin, what are the different types of property valuations and why choose one over another?
Yep. So typically we offer an on-site appraisal or a desktop appraisal. With today's technology, desktop appraisals are becoming more accurate, where you're able to use Google Earth to look at buildings, do measurements, see the exterior, interior of the buildings. We ask for loss prevention reports to get even more data. Where it's kind of lacking on the desktop assessment side is machinery equipment. There's a lot more variables that go into machinery equipment, the density of equipment, the type of equipment. You're not putting your eyes on it to be able to come up with like a appraiser's subjectivity to replacement cost value and having more detail on discussions and things like that about equipment. We say the desktop assessment is probably 20 to 25% accurate. And then we move on to on-site appraisals where we say it's 5 to 10%. We're doing boots on the ground. We're asking for building prints, blueprints to confirm square footage, to confirm building material, things like that. And then for machinery equipment, we're actually walking through inventory equipment, having discussions with plant personnel to try to come up with good replacement cost values, as well as our in-house databases, calling vendors, things like that to try to build our estimates.
Great. And so, we talked about, why this is important and then the different ways to do it. So now tell me, Justin, what is the process? What is your process for analyzing a portfolio?
So we like to start at the top approach. We ask for the statement of values, and then we try to group things by type, by occupancy, and then do a dollars per square foot analysis. And then we use benchmarks to flag locations that might not look correct. And then we're not saying you're right or wrong, but then we ask more questions about what's going on at that location. Is the square footage wrong? Do we have the occupancy wrong? Can we break up the occupancy a little bit better? Is it all offices? Is 50% offices, 30% warehouses, something like that, to try to hone in our values? And then, last resort is, okay, we don't know where these values came from. We know they're wrong. What can we do? And we would recommend probably an on-site at that point and creating that basis of value.
And Charlie, let's hear from you as well. What happens when a portfolio has many different uses, or how do you handle a large portfolio with hundreds of locations, for example?
Yeah, I think what Justin was sharing with you as far as the SOV review being our first action is very true from especially the large portfolios. I think our instinct is really just to start looking at those top TIVs, look at the top total insured values within a portfolio. But what you miss there oftentimes is that they all may be of one occupancy, but you may be carrying several different occupancies within your portfolio. I know that Justin and I worked on one here recently where after he completed the grouping based on the occupancies, he was able to identify that machinery in a certain set of buildings for this client was really low. So we used that data, the red flag that he identified, established an on-site valuation, which confirmed all of the assumptions and the conversations with the risk manager. And the risk manager was then able to take that real world information from their site and then apply that to other facilities that were also in the portfolio. So while our instinct may be to go to the top 10, it's really looking at the different groups, the different occupancies, and grouping them based on something that makes sense within your own portfolio.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. And just a quick reminder to our audience, if you have a question, put it into the question box on your screen, and we want this to be interactive, so get those questions in. And I'm going to go to I'm going to go to Justin with my next question. We've noticed that the market is transitioning with a slight softening, or at least not hardening at the previous rate. How does that affect valuations, Justin?
Right. So insurers are more, I guess, what I said earlier is that they're really stringent in the hard market. Well, now they're trying to loosen up things and not worry as much about values. So there's less focus on values. They're taking on a little bit more risk. But again, valuation is the foundation of your property insurance program. So you want to make sure that they're up to date. You're looking at them every year, and you're have some kind of methodology to keep them up to date. It's a good time to fix gaps, be proactive, and keep that trusting relationship between you and your insurer.
And Charlie, what are your thoughts?
We just have, like you said, experienced this hard market, and we're seeing some softening. It has been industry specific, is what we have seen so far. And while a new valuation may not be mandated for your renewal now as it was in maybe the past couple of years, it's definitely the time to address any gaps in your portfolio. Justin mentioned earlier, making sure you have a kind of a baseline on site around every 5 years. If that hasn't happened for some of your larger facilities, now's the time to go ahead and catch that up. Go ahead and get your portfolio in tip-top condition for the next hard market. Make sure that you're not being overran by the recent inflation, but it's also a chance for clients and customers to maybe you've had some forced increases over the last couple of years because you didn't have valuations completed. Maybe the panel just required a 15-20% increase, and now it's the time to go ahead and validate that. Are you now being overvalued? There's just as big of a problem or a challenge with being overvalued as undervalued when it comes to your premium. So we definitely are recommending that even with the softening of the market, stay on top of your values. Make sure that there's something that can support your overall risk program, just as Frank had mentioned earlier.
And Charlie, real quick, just for our audience, do you want to define COPE data and even SOV, statement of values?
Yeah, the SOV is going to be your statement of values, as you said. That's going to break down based off your building, your machinery, your equipment. The other, if you're also covering the goods that are in your warehouses, that would also be covered in there. When you're looking at your COPE data, that's going to be the foundational data that your loss estimates, as well as your property risk program, are depending upon. And that would all be in the SOV as well.
Great, thanks, Charlie. We just had a question from our audience on that one, so I thought I'd just address it right away. Let's go to our next question, and this goes to Frank. What are some common mistakes that risk managers or companies make when determining property valuations?
Right, of course. First off, using past accounting records for market value to create your building replacement cost schedule is a common mistake. For reasons already discussed, construction costs increase over time. We need to account for those changes year over year, or as best we can, in order to be sure we have a reliable count of our true property valuations. Secondly, and maybe I'm a data guy. I think I am statistics guy. I love taking deep dives, really understanding what the property is about, but not taking a deeper dive into buildings infrastructure. I think that's a common mistake. For example, it's construction type, it's quality of build, occupancy, current total square footage of buildings or structures, and cost per square foot based on the building type. Another common mistake is taking a price per square foot from one region of the US and applying to another. Now, this might be an extreme example, but I think it proves the point. For instance, the same building in Peoria, Illinois will cost much less to rebuild than if that building was in New York City. We can see that it may even be possible that some locations on your schedule may be overvalued while others undervalued. Finally, taking that deeper dive, having the data available may help when discussing valuations with your carrier, i.e., how you arrived at a valuation. Being able to respond timely, confidently, and with supporting data should help carriers understand your valuation methodology better.
Great. And Justin, what do you think as far as common mistakes in this process?
Yeah. So one of the first questions we always like to ask when we go to an insured is asking, well, how are you developing your property valuation? How are you reporting your numbers? What's your methodology? And sometimes they come back and they have this great methodology, and then sometimes they're like the other spectrum would be, well, we don't know. They were like that when we got here. So using the correct methodology, using the right type of value, replacement cost new, versus something like market value, actual cash value, other things. There's just so many types of value that you can report that you want to make sure that you're reporting the correct one. As I mentioned earlier, there's no one really responsible for coming up with replacement cost value to track that. So it's good to stay on top of trying to figure out the best methodology on coming up with those values. As Frank said, that it is kind of a moving target every year as well. You have inflation that you need to keep track of, market conditions. If you have a large book of business, trying to figure out what changes have happened at that location or at those locations. You know, we just ran across an account where their statement of values haven't been updated from last year. Plant expanded. They put in 500,000 square feet. They're missing that in their statement of values, their reported values, and that's $20-30 million of value that they're not reporting. So they're putting their business at risk. Another issue could be you're not having that correct baseline value. You're reporting the value over and over, the same value over and over. It could be, or you're updating a value that you don't know where it came from, and you're just you're I guess aggregating a mistake over and over. So there's lots of things that we've seen in our experience on mistakes, and there's ways to correct it. There's ways to look at it and find those mistakes pretty easily. That statement of values top-down approach is one of them, looking for those discrepancies.
Great, thanks, Justin. And Justin, we'll stay with you for this question. What are some factors that impact cost, and how can you keep an evaluation affordable?
Yep. So when we look at on-site valuations or desktop valuations, we usually ask for loss prevention reports. We want to understand the business. We want to understand the complexity, and then also define the scope of work. Desktop is usually a little bit cheaper than an on-site, but again, it depends on what the accuracy you're looking for. If the insurer is going to be okay with a desktop. There's also some occupancies where a desktop doesn't make sense. You're looking at a chemical plant, lots of piping, lots of machinery. It's much more difficult to say that, you know, the accuracy of a desktop is going to be good enough for that type of occupancy. Looking at, I guess, a big book of business, you can, again, look, maybe kind of scatter or come up with strategies to say, well, let's do a few on-site valuations, similar occupancy, and then we can extrapolate that data to similar occupancies, saying, okay, this dollars per square foot would make sense at this one because they do almost the exact same thing. There's some redundancy there, or we can even break it up into pieces, saying, okay, the office is this much dollars per square foot, and really get granular if we needed to. The big thing is trying to have that methodology for developing values. The initial cost might be high to do valuations, but as you grow that methodology and maybe you start doing indices after you create that baseline, your cost is going to go down for valuations. So, you know, it's an expensive, it can be expensive up front, but as you keep going and building and creating this methodology, it gets much cheaper, you know.
Absolutely. And Frank, what about you? What do you say?
Yeah, well, of course, risk management departments operate within a budget, and how to best allocate these dollars is critical. So allocating funds towards evaluation analysis that makes sense and helps a risk manager determine where he or she may be on target, and where he or she may need to adjust their valuation calculation process. For example, let's say you order 10 valuations to be completed. Compare the on-site or desktop valuation results to your calculation for the same asset. If you are within reasonable range, you know that for that region with similar assets, you're on target. If, on the other hand, the result of a valuation comes back and it's off, now you know where your valuation process may need adjusting. In addition, you have a resource to discuss the results, understand the why, how, or where those numbers are off, and then make the best decision for your program moving forward with your valuation. So, in short, it's a process that you want to go through, and it's easy to get intimidated by that, but at the same time, I think knowing it, really helps a risk manager to make that next step forward, to make that recommendation, to the upper management on what they need to make changes in valuations or process. So it may appear intimidating at first, but when you have that, the why, the how, the where, things start to fall into place, make sense. And again, it's always that confidence. Like, these are solid. These are great numbers. I'm confident in it. We can make decisions based on what we have here. And being able to verify your valuation as best as possible within a reasonable level is key to making that next step forward.
Absolutely. Thank you, Frank. And I have one more question for our panelists. So get those questions in. We're going to go to Q&A after this. So Charlie, I'm going to go to you for this final question. How does global risk consultants handle property valuations, and can you just talk about some of the benefits of our system?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you've heard both Frank and Justin talk about, we believe that the valuations are really the cornerstone of your property risk program. Your loss estimates are going to be based on them. Your replacement cost is obviously being based on them. And to keep them accurate is not really a one-time only engagement. There can be some immediate needs and concerns, but what we like to do with our team and with our clients is really work on a roadmap. As you can see in the visual there, you're going to start at the red pen and we're trying to get to the blue pen. And the way that we do that has been outlined really through our conversation with an SOV review to indicate, kind of help us develop that path. Jared and his team then will take that data, identify some immediate needs for maybe on-site or desktop valuation services to go ahead and get a baseline, and then also set up that roadmap that we know what's going to happen next year, what's going to happen the following year, and using that data as well as market data, industry data, and then your client specific data to keep your own indices and move your values up so you don't get overran over time. We believe that this strategy of staying up to date gives you the ability to present your program with confidence to the markets and also to tell your story. You're showing that you're being very proactive and not letting the valuations overrun you over time.
And Justin, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree that you really need to look at property valuations as that foundation of your property program. Like what we've been discussing today is that it's a moving target. You need to create that methodology, figure out a way how to keep things up to date, so you're reducing the risk the risk to you.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. This is the end of the formal presentation. We have Q&A coming right up. Lots of great questions in. Please add more. We have plenty excited for this next part of the discussion. Quick recap from me. What did we learn today, right? From our panelists, we learned inflation and supply chain issues made valuations a critical part of the insurance buying and risk strategy process. It was already important before, but sort of gained more importance during this time. We learned that many companies are in danger of claims not covering rebuilding or replacement costs, and we learned about the timing of valuations, and our folks here said every 5 to 7 years on site, and then annual desktop assessments to supplement. We also talked about valuations being critical even if there's a softening of the market, and of course that on-site valuations provide the most concrete support. So with that, we're going to go to our Q&A session. I'll leave it here on the thank you slide, but plenty of more to come. Charlie, did you want to just go over COPE data real quick? I think you wanted to kind of maybe make a clarification first before we
yeah, absolutely, Jared. Yes, I wasn't keeping up with the Q&A as we were talking and didn't understand the question. It was really asking us to define what COPE is. So COPE is an acronym for the construction, occupancy, protection, and exposure. So that would be identifiers, different elements of your building. For instance, are you in a flood zone? That would be one of your exposures. What construction type? Are you non-combustible or are you combustible? All of those factors are taken into your loss prevention program. And there again, that helps set the exposures that would be there for your building. So apologize, I didn't understand the question earlier, but just want to make sure we clarified that before we moved on.
Absolutely. We got a really interesting one here from Melissa. Any advice on how to report heritage buildings as accurately as possible? I assume heritage and historical sort of are synonyms there. So any advice on a heritage historical building, folks?
Yeah, I can answer that one. Historical buildings can be tricky to come up with replacement cost value. Usually, even though it's historic, it's not exempt from building to current code and building code compliances. Other things that you want to consider is there will be restrictions on the repair or replacement of a historic building based on what I guess the local historic authority is telling you and the strength of what that authority has. So there has to be discussion with that local historic authority to find out what really needs to be done and what needs to be kept historic. And then, sometimes a building's not historic just because it's old. It could be someone significant stayed there, or there's some event that happened there that made it historic and really doesn't have anything to do with the values that go back into a replacement cost value of that building, and might not even need to be replaced similar to that building. Historic buildings usually are geared towards more reproduction costs than replacement costs, but again, it really depends on what I guess what we call defining characteristics of that building. So when you're looking to insure it, you have to look at what is you have to define the defining characteristics of that building, and then determine, okay, these pieces of these pieces need to be done at reproduction cost, and then the rest of the building be done at replacement cost. And then it'll most likely be more expensive because of the building codes. It might have to have more modern HVAC, more modern, electrical, all these other things that you're not taking into account, and it's not, I guess, reproduction on that end.
Great answer there, Justin, for a very interesting question. Let's go to this one from Matt. We're planning on doing an in-person appraisal this year at our largest location, but we have several hundred locations of varying sizes and cannot appraise them all. If our appraisal values are higher or lower than our model was previously showing, how should we adjust our overall valuation?
Yeah, I think that goes back to, I guess, examining the SOV, creating those, I guess, maybe one location might not be enough. You might need to do 2 or 3 of the same type of location, and then creating kind of that benchmark or number you can compare it to, that dollars per square foot. You say, okay, this building is very similar. The dollars per square foot should be similar for these 10 other locations. You do one on site, and then the other ones you can do desktop. That type of way to kind of save, I guess, the cost of an appraisal, and looking at the whole book of business, or you do one appraisal this year, one next year, and just kind of work your way through it.
Justin, I think that kind of falls back in line to where we were talking earlier about grouping them together. It sounds like they may have a fairly large portfolio, so making sure that you are getting a sampling of all your occupancies. Make sure we don't apply a warehouse number to your manufacturing facility. And then once you group them together, you find a couple benchmarks that you've established. Then you can safely start to updating and applying those numbers across the board. But you got to be careful to make sure you're talking apples to apples in the long run.
Great. And Alexander asked, what is the cost of an appraisal and who should initiate it, a broker or a client?
Well, the cost varies based on several different factors, and I think looking through the Q&A, we've got a couple questions similar to this.
Yeah.
But obviously the facility size, the facility location, what the occupancy is. Do you want the building only appraised? Do you want the building and the contents, the machinery? And then what's the density of that? I know that, Justin, when you're working things up, we're assuming a certain square footage that we can safely assess in a certain day. But there's many different variables. We have valuations initiated by the insurance carrier. We have them initiated by the owners of the building. There's really not a standard that I would say from that standpoint, but yes, definitely you have to factor in all the different variables to determine the final cost and whether it's going to be desktop or on site.
This one This one comes from Connor. How accurate is CoreLogic software to update SOVs?
I can answer that. So I guess CoreLogic's building values is just a tool, so you have to make sure you're using that tool correctly. They're using a modeling approach based off, I guess, their experience of how much it should cost to replace a warehouse or a restaurant or something like that. But they also have cost factors where you can back into numbers if you wanted to. So it's really understanding how to use the tool. I think it's a good tool of creating that, I guess, comparison value, and then I wouldn't use it to really develop, but to compare and then ask questions like, okay, my building, they're saying a restaurant should be $180 a square foot. I'm reporting $50 a square foot. Why is there such a big gap? And is there a way for me to do some research to figure out what the actual cost should be? Maybe, maybe it's at 120 or $140. Just, I think it's more of a tool to ask questions. It's a good way to analyze your business, and then and then you can make adjustments that way.
Here's another question. Who is responsible for reducing values on buildings that are found to be overvalued by the carrier evaluation?
So I'd say that your SOV is going to be it's a conversation between you and the carrier, and there's going to be times where you may find differences between what they may have projected over the years from the inflation piece. And then if you were to hire a third-party appraisal, it comes in lower. Then you have some justification behind just request, outside of you just asking for the value to be lowered, you there have some hard data that is replacement cost. So I think it's important to have the data and then take it to the carrier. But ultimately it's a conversation, and there needs to be an agreement between yourself and the carrier on what that value is. But information is king, and having that data on your side is going to support your request.
Yeah, if I may, I want to jump in with Charlie. I agree 100% with Charlie. It's that data. It's having that support, that documentation that gives the risk manager the confidence to have those conversations with the carrier, so they can prove their side of the point. I mean, the carrier may not know 100% of your building, how it's built, and what the exposures are, but having that data and the support really reinforces what you're trying to communicate in your conversations with the carrier, and then you have that understanding between the two parties and come to an agreement a little bit more quickly and understandably.
Absolutely. And here's a question from Nathaniel. It's actually a few questions, so I'm going to pop it into our panelist chat just so you can refer to it. But it says, how long does it take from the engagement to preparation of final report for evaluation? And then another question is, if the site visit approach is taken, how much labor and work is involved on the client's end, aside from day of inspection? And then what is the average cost of evaluation? We talked about that one, but Nathaniel specifies medium to large size industrial building, for example. So maybe we can take those one by one, guys. And again, it's in the chat for you. Take a peek at.
Let me jump in on the site visit approach is taken, how much labor and work is involved on the client's end, the day of inspection. When we're working up our quote, and that'll be a collaborative process, it may be identified that we need more than one appraiser there, just to limit the impact on your facility. Instead of having one person there for 3 weeks, we may have 3 people there for 1 week. But when we have someone on site, they will need to have an escort so they can have access to the different pieces of the building. Prior to the day of the appraisal, we'll be asking for any building plans that you have, any loss engineering reports, as Justin mentioned earlier, just as much background information as possible so that our team knows what they're walking into. That's going to make them more efficient and also help them identify kind of the target areas. If they know a larger density of equipment is in one part of the building, they're going to know how to plan for that visit. So it's a collaborative approach, just like almost everything we do. There'll be conversations up front, so you would know what's expected that day. When it gets into the costing, I think we've talked about a little bit of that. There's many different factors that go on that. But when you're asking about the engagement and the preparation to final report, Justin, you want to jump in on that part?
Yeah, so usually we say what, about 45 days from the site visit completion, we'll issue the final report. That's probably typical, 45 to 60 business days. Again, it depends on the complexity of the report and how much research, how much information we're able to get while on site. I'll add on to, I guess, the site visit approach. Kind of like what Charlie was saying, we usually send a pre-visit letter detailing kind of what our visit is, requests for information, building prints, equipment layouts, things like that, so we can kind of get a good idea of what we're running into. And we'll typically come in the morning, do a tour of an area and inventory equipment, and then set up interviews maybe throughout the day, saying, okay, I might need 20 minutes of your time. Can we just talk about some of this equipment that we saw out there? Talk about replacement costs, what's going on in that process, things like that, to understand what we're looking at all the.
Great. Thanks, guys, for those thorough answers. We'll keep rolling here with the questions because there's some really good ones here. Liza asked any suggestions on how to obtain valuations on contents only when an organization leases locations only.
So there's different ways. I guess the desktop approach would be using an asset listing and looking at acquisition costs and maybe indexes. And then we'll usually look at the big pieces of equipment, something maybe, $500,000 or more, and asking questions and making sure that we're in line with what they would expect for replacement costs. We'll do our research. We'll talk to vendors, see if we can come up with a replacement cost, but then we'll try to refine that number a little bit more, because there's installation costs, you have engineering costs, you have design costs, things like that go into it that we might miss if we're just calling a vendor and saying, well, how much is that robotic arm to replace? As far as an on-site, we would do the walkthrough inventory and come up with replacement costs that way.
Great. Here's another question. How does depreciation factor into property valuations for insurance purposes, if at all?
Yeah, so we don't typically do depreciated values, because your property it depends on your property policy. Most of them will cover you for replacement cost new, unless you have some kind of other agreement saying actual cash value or something like that, and then you might take into account depreciation. But for the typical policy, you want to make sure you're reporting replacement cost new.
Yeah, Russell here asks thoughts on list price valuation for buildings being held for sale.
That would be a different kind of, I guess, valuation. That wouldn't be that replacement cost value.
Right. I had a feeling I knew what you
Yeah.
were going to say. Hey, we don't conflate the two, right? One is for resale and one is for, an insurance claim. And they can be quite different. Cheryl asks, for contents only exposures, what's the safest way to calculate SOV over multiple locations, factoring inflation year over year?
Yeah, there's some companies that come out with indices for machinery equipment. I know Zurich comes out with one. I'm trying to think of some other ones that do equipment and machinery. But there's indexes out there that you should be able to find that you can use to index your machinery equipment.
Just a few more, everybody. And we'll get you off the hot seat, especially you, Justin. Really appreciate you taking all these questions, but they're really good, right? And I think this is providing a lot of value. I think we keep it rolling. Here's another question. Can you suggest any resources to obtain different industry and occupancy benchmark square footages?
I don't have any off the top of my head. I think RS Means might have some that are available for free. There's quite a few paid ones. CoreLogic, RS Means that also has a square footage data set you can purchase. Compass is out there. So there's a few that you can pay for. I don't know how many are available for free.
And Melissa asks any tips on how to encourage building occupants to inform the risk manager of the value of their equipment on a regular basis.
Just creating that methodology, right? So one is keeping track of additions and deletions. Um, if you already, I guess, create that baseline for machinery equipment, just keeping up to date, saying, okay, we're adding this project in. It's a $5 million project. It should be completed in the end of 2023, and you'll add that. And maybe they're replacing another production line of 3 million, so you would delete that. So it's just trying to keep up to date and having, I guess, some type of methodology of keeping track of that stuff.
Yeah. And what type of RCV valuations can be completed post-loss but pre-litigation? And would they have any sort of standing in the market?
We haven't done a lot of those type of valuations. I did one recently, but I don't know what the outcome is yet. I know in the past we've done claims analysis where we'll go out and talk about replacement cost of, and then also discuss what was actually there prior to the loss and trying to come up with what, I guess, the replacement cost of what was there.
And last question from our audience, and then we're going to go back to Justin for a quick final word. Are insurers mandating a review of formal appraisers paid for by insureds since this is proprietary to the policyholder? What has been your experience when an independent appraisal report is misaligned to an insurer's internal metrics? I'll put that one in the chat just in case.
Yeah, I would say that when the appraisal report is misaligned to the internal metrics, even though it is proprietary, if you're wanting to get serious consideration from the insurer, you're going to need to let them review it. As far as mandatory review at other times, you're correct. The information is the ownership of whoever initiated and purchased the data, which that would be up to you and your insured to have that conversation a little bit further. Justin, anything you want to add to that?
No, I would say it's about, like you said, whoever is purchasing that appraisal, that's their property. They can decide who to share it with. We haven't had any real big issues of I guess, contention with appraisals. We might have some discussions of how you came up with this value, and we'll just have those discussions. But as far as acceptance, I think our appraisals have been always accepted as good values or acceptable values.
Great. So on that note, let's go back to Justin Smullison from RIMS for a final word. I just want to say a quick thank you to Charlie, Justin, and Frank for doing this. But go ahead, Justin, give us a final word and a recap.
All right, that was excellent. I don't think we've ever addressed as many questions as we did right there. So this was certainly, I think, a record, at least as long as I've been doing the RIMS webinars. Special thanks to the audience and to Frank Francone of Brookfield Properties and TÜV GRC's Justin Chen, Charlie Carricker, and Jared Shelley for their time and expertise. The TÜV GRC team has your questions, and if we didn't address your questions today, they will reply to you directly. A copy of this webinar will be archived on rims.org within a few business days. That'll be on rims.org/webinars. There are lots of resources for you all to access. Find them at tuvsud.com/GRC. And the panelists' email addresses are on your screen right now, so you can visit them as well. Finally, folks, Risk World will be held in sunny San Diego, California, May 5th through May 8th. Register today at rims.org/riskworld. Remember to visit TÜV Sud at booth 1927, and they will have another webinar with us, RIMS, on May 23rd. So check back on rims.org/webinars soon for that information. Finally, RIMS is global, and we'd love for you to build your network with us. Visit rims.org/membership to apply for RIMS membership. This was a great session. Love the engagement. Thank you all, and stay safe.